everyone. We are Yan, Jiankai, and Wei Qing. Today, we are going to present our Changemaker project on students' expectation and experience of summative feedback. At LSE, summative feedback plays a central role in supporting student learning and development. It's designed to help us connect our current performance with future academic growth. But how well is this working in practice, and what might be getting in the way? In this research, we explore undergraduate experience of feedback in the sociology department to better understand where the system is working well and where there may be room for improvement. By listening closely to a student's voice, we aim to identify patterns, challenges, and potential ways forward, with the ultimate goal of strengthening feedback and assessment system that supports meaningful learning for all students. To start off, let me just introduce you the primary goals of our study. We focus on exploring how undergraduate students in the sociology department experience and use summative feedback. We're particularly interested in understanding what students expect from feedback and how their actual experience align with those expectations. Throughout the project, we focus on 4 key areas. First, we look at students' awareness of the academic code, specifically what it says about feedback timelines, qualities, and constraints. Second, we examine how students perceive the timeliness and usefulness of the feedback they receive. Third, we explore how effective the current feedback formats are, including free text comments and the use of highlighted marking boxes. And finally, we ask students to reflect on what alternative approaches might better support their learning. The insights from this research will help inform ongoing conversation about how to improve the feedback process so it is more supportive and actionable for students.
Let me begin by briefly situating our research within the existing literature. First, Robinson and her colleagues, who are education researchers, found a persistent mismatch in expectations. Teachers often expect students to take initiative in using feedback, while students, in contrast, wait for clear and actionable guidance. This disconnect weakens the learning impact of feedback. Secondly, Wood and Jones, researchers in higher education policy, argue that many universities place institutional emphasis on grades rather than student development. As a result, students become preoccupied with marks and rankings, often missing the developmental value of feedback. Thirdly, Lupese, who specialize in supervisory feedback, highlights how feedback functions differently across disciplines. In sociology, for example, terms like critical analysis are difficult to grasp and apply. This creates confusion, especially when students are unfamiliar with that such abstract criteria actually look like in practice. So, where is the gap and how is our study different? A lot of existing research focuses on first-year students, especially in STEM fields and often in developing countries, but much less attention has been paid on how feedback works in elite and theory-heavy programs like ours, especially across all year groups. That's where our study comes in. We focus specifically on the LSE Sociology Department, a highly selective and intellectually demanding program. Our sample includes students from all 3 undergraduate years, providing a more comprehensive perspective. We also look at unique challenges in this department. For example, the lack of clear grade boundaries, which many students told us they find confusing. So how did we carry out the research? We chose a qualitative approach using semi-structured interviews. This method allowed us to explore common themes across participants while also giving students the space to voice their individual perspectives and stories in depth. In terms of ethics, we obtained full approval from LSE's Research Ethics Committee. All data was securely stored and anonymized in line with the university's data management policy, ensuring both participants' privacy and the credibility of our findings. We interviewed 9 undergraduate students selected from year 1 to year 3. We used the convenience sampling, which, while not random, was appropriate given the exploratory and the small-scale nature of our project. So what questions did we ask? To structure the interviews, we designed 4 thematic modules. Firstly, we look at essay feedback. We wanted to know how students actually interpret the comments they get on coursework and whether those comments generally help them improve in future assessment. Secondly, we explore exam feedback. A lot of students mentioned they barely receive useful feedback on exams, so we asked what kind of support they would find useful after exam assessments, especially since exams often count a large portion of their grades. Thirdly, we focused on the grading criteria. We were curious about whether students really understand how their work is being marked. Do they find the system transparent and fair? And how confident do they feel applying those standards? Lastly, we gave students a chance to step back and share their overall reflections and general satisfaction with how feedback is handled in the department and any ideas they had for improving the systems going forward. So that's a quick overview of our literature review methodology and interview design. I will now hand over to Jian Kai, who will walk us through the key findings from our analysis.
Yes. After a rigorous analysis of our interview data, we got the following 4 findings. The first one key findings is that students often found feedback too vague to support meaningful improvement. Comments like needs more depth or unclear argument were commonly mentioned, but these remarks were rarely tied to a specific paragraph or section, leaving students unsure what exactly needed to change. Many expressed that summary-only feedback lacked clarity. In contrast, inline comments placed directly alongside the text were described as much more helpful, as they could immediately see what the marker was referring to. Interestingly, even high-performing students, including those who received first, still wanted more constructive suggestions. Just knowing a piece of work was good wasn't enough. They wanted to know how to make it better. The second issue students raised was inconsistency in marking and feedbacks across different modules and staff. Some described feeling confused or disoriented when a writing approach praised in one course was criticized in another. This made it difficult to build a consistent academic writing style. Rubrics were often viewed as too broad or applied inconsistently. And because expectations vary so much, students struggled to know what exactly to aim for. Even when they sought help from academic mentors, they found the advice was not always useful, mainly because the mentors weren't familiar with the grading logic of specific courses. This left students unsure how to apply feedback across modules in a coherent way. The third theme focused on exam feedback, which students widely regarded as ineffective or entirely unusable. In many courses, feedback came only in the form of generalized, collective summaries, lists of common mistakes that lacked any personal relevance. Students reported that they were not allowed to view their own exam scripts, making it nearly impossible to match the feedback with what they had actually written. Even when feedback did arrive, it often came weeks later, after the chances to reflect or improve had passed. As a result, many students felt that the exam process was disconnected from their learning and that they were being assessed without any real opportunity to grow. Our final finding concerns the barriers students face in using feedback effectively. Many were unsure if they were even allowed to speak to the person who marked their work. Some avoided office hours altogether, not because of a lack of interest, but because they didn't know what to ask or feared the conversation might be perceived as grading challenging. While limited and difficult to book office hour slots have long been a concern, a deeper issue emerged. Many students simply didn't know how to engage in these conversations in the first place. They weren't sure what kind of questions were appropriate or how to seek clarification, especially when they had no access to the actual marker or weren't allowed to discuss grades with the course convener either. This sense of uncertainty and discomfort acts as a strong deterrent, keeping students from using the feedback channels that are meant to support their learning. Based on all of these findings, we now propose the following suggestions.
So we'll focus on 4 key areas. Firstly, improving feedback quality, and then regarding timeliness for formative feedback, and it would also be beneficial to address policy constraints and strengthening support structures. So what do all of them mean in practice? So First of all, regarding improving the feedback quality, we stress that it needs to be improved, the specificities. Many students felt that their feedback was too vague to be helpful. We recommend more focused, detailed comment that clearly highlights strength, areas for improvement, and how to move forward. Ideally, the feedback should be able to refer to a specific section of an essay or suggest specific ways to improve. For example, instead of saying, please be more critical, it would be more helpful to suggest scholars or theories that have different perspectives or approaches for students to look further into. Moreover, we would like to specifically highlight a recommendation for exam feedback. Since students strongly felt that collective feedback for exams doesn't really meet their individual learning needs, we recommend moving towards more individualized and concise feedback on exams, and more importantly, allowing students to access their answer sheets. We do recognize the heavy workload of marking exam papers, and we want to stress that based on our interviews, students will appreciate later and shorter feedback rather than earlier and collective and usually generic feedback. Making an adjustment regarding exam feedback would be one of the most prominent and effective actions to take to improve students' experience of summative feedback. Timeliness was another major theme. Formative feedback, which can directly feed into students' performance in the summative assessment, should be returned at least 2 or more weeks before summative deadline and before the term's end. Only then can the student have enough time not only to reflect on it, but also to ask for clarification during term time. On the policy side, we suggest lifting the current restriction that constraining students from discussing feedback with their markers, while allowing for following up with their markers would better facilitate understanding and avoid all the confusion and workarounds which might lead students to wrong interpretation of the feedback and to receive unequal support. Finally, we propose strengthening support structures to help students make the most of their feedback. This can be done in the following ways. Firstly, introduce structured office hour where students have access to some tips and guidelines on how to ask effective and clear questions, so teachers can provide more concrete support and clarification during the office hours, and students can also submit questions in advance in order to engage with the markers and the feedback more effectively. Secondly, running of optional feedback workshop, which could be informal sessions or forums where a student can reflect on feedback alongside peers and mentors and build skills or for interpreting and applying feedback across their academic work. Together, these changes aim to create a feedback culture that is more consistent, transparent, and responsive, empowering students not just to understand their performance, but to grow from it. We hope our research can contribute to the development of a more effective summative feedback system. That's the end of our presentation, and please feel free to read our poster, which contains more details about our project. Thank you so much for listening.